A very good morning to one and all. First of all, I thank Vivekananda and his colleagues for inviting me to share some views. And I believe more often it should be more of an interaction than a one-sided engagement. I start with the caveat that I'm not a good speaker, and therefore you may not get the expected response or expected information from me. Nonetheless, the number of individuals present does not count. It is the quality that matters. Very recently, I attended a seminar, and there the director stated that, like an insect stick, the numbers do not matter. It's a couple of insect sticks or one that creates along with magic or an influence or gives this essence. So today I'll be, as has been stated, I'll be sharing some of the views on the aspect of traditional mechanisms, mediation mechanisms, governing paradigms with reference to the Northeast. But then the basic theme for the year, that is governance for coexistence. This theme, the aspect of governance, encompasses a wide area of activities if we look at it from the prism of state, then the sovereign entity, how it has been governed, is important. But then what is more important is that whether it reaches out to the people, the positive vibes that is being created, and the entities involved are directed and controlled through a set procedure. In other words, it is good governance which is most important. And when we look at things, or if we try to figure out the claim by most of the states, what they say is that they claim to be providing good governance. But then how far has the government been able, or the state been able to lead to positive outcomes, satisfying the people, that is beyond the citizens, and to what extent they have benefited in the long run. And when we speak, we have to take into account not only the role of the executive, which is uttered through certain legislative processes, the proper implementation of the processes, as well as how the judiciary has reflected or impacted on matters which have come up before it, either by way of litigation, through parties, or those which have been taken up suo motu by the judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court and the High Courts. In this aspect, governance is very much linked up with constitutionalism, and therefore we find the terminology of transformative constitutionalism, which has been there in India since the past, but then post-independence in the recent past, this has been very much reflected in various stages. The developments, if you look at how governance is sought to be provided, how the country is sought to be governed, is very much evident or provided for under the Constitution. But then, as a living organism, it has shaped the destiny of the country through interpretations. Although the term, before coming to the mediation process, although the term has been in use since quite some time, but then the aspect of transformation involving institutions, both modern and traditional, was for the first time officially recognized or stated by the former president of the Supreme Court of South Africa, Justice Langa. Because in South Africa, the Chief Justice is known as the President of the Supreme Court. And it was for the first time that he stated the effect of governance, in what way a country needs to be governed. And this was during the course of its interpretation of the interim constitution of South Africa, which to a great extent had an imprint of Indian jurists, particularly Justice Bhagwati and Professor Madhavan. So their views were sought, and their views were sought because of Justice Bhagwati's prominent stature, contribution, and so far constitutional interpretation from the academic aspect that was seen in the writings and the works of Prof. Kendra. Now here, what did they do? They, as we know, a minority white government was there, and this minority government prevailed upon the majority during the period of apartheid, and a lot of miserable things happened. And it was at that point of time that they decided that the new independent South Africa, based on a democratic dispensation, would end up in acrimony if they decide to take upon themselves the injustices of the past and try to counter them. And therefore what they did was to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now why this Truth and Reconciliation Commission? So that it is not only that they want to find out the truth, but then the measure or impact that they wanted to have was with regard to reconciliation. So past is past. The bitterness had been there, But then, how to see, how to reconcile and ensure that the systems prevailing in that particular country, the traditional institutions, could work on the basis of their customs and to ensure the progress of the nation. So here, what was emphasized upon was that of harmony and progress, the focal theme of this year's of the center. So I have started with an illustration from a foreign country because in that particular country, while they adopted their own constitution, they reflected much widely and tried to take up some of the systems prevailing in our country, because they had a very large section of the Indian community, and they felt that the lessons of Gandhi and others can be emulated so that violence post apartheid does not take place. Now, here, when you speak of the behaviors and the control that is being exercised, it is nothing but the ideals of governance. And so far, coming back to our country, in India, it is the plurality in diverse aspects and contrast. Because even today, we have one India with two peoples. The haves, the rich, and the have-nots. Economic considerations to come into play. But then, when we look at the situation in our country, we may sometimes feel that we have not progressed much. But then, when we look at it from the international perspective in comparison, India is in a much better light in different dispensations of the countries. Similarly, it is like an island of peace and progress. If we just consider the case of the SAARC countries or the neighboring countries, because each and every country has had troubled times, although some of these countries gained independence at contemporary times with India. But then, while they have not succeeded, or while we have been able to hold our head high during these times, it is precisely because this country, its people, its ancient customs had an important role or has an important role to play. The traditions, the customs, the culture, more prominently, have impacted upon the society, and it has given a leeway to express the views, to express their affinities, to practice their cultures and customs. And if we look at it from the angle of the categories which have been given constitutional protection, what we find is that the traditions, the practices are very much reflected in our basic document or the core document, that is the Constitution. We need to look into some of the provisions, particularly the 5th and 6th schedule to the Constitution. And when it comes to the 6th schedule, the significance in having the 6th schedule, if one considers what led to the provisioning for the 6th schedule, why the Borderlay Committee subcommittee had to be constituted, and who were the members of the Borderlay subcommittee. Bosumatari, the late Chaudhary, Nichols Roy. If you look at it, we find that the committee was composed in such a manner from people of then composite Assam that they could interact with the people wherever they visit. They could gain the confidence that their people were there discussing with them what needs to be done, how we need to be given such protection in the Constitution. The debates are a rich treasure for us in the shape of constitutional debates. And there we find that this protection was being provided because it was realized that the country, if it has to progress as a whole, has to ensure the upliftment of the people along the length and breadth of the nation. In this regard, if we go back, prior to the days of the British, we find that the traditional institutions in the Northeast were very rich, and at the same time, there was a belief that certain groups, particularly the indigenous, were way behind. And so, when the British came and they began to administer, if you look at the Indian Councils Act, or for that matter, the Government of India Acts, 1919, 1935, during those times, we find even the Britishers consider certain areas as partially and totally excluded areas in which some of the laws, spirit of the laws may prevail, but the black letter of the law would not be applicable. And the governor of the province was conferred with certain powers to look into the protection as to how the people could be protected, how their customs, cultures could be ensured. Of course, there are two views, that it was a design, deliberate design on the part of Britishers to refrain or restrain the people in certain areas from governing those constituents. But then, on the other hand, this was recognized. The recognition was there. And what was the basis of the recognition? The basis of the recognition has been that rich traditional institutions were there, and the people were very much rooted in the soil. Of course, at that point of time, post 35, it was Assam, Tripura, and Manipur. And so far, Manipur and Tripura have to be concerned. They came within the Indian Union a couple of years later, in 1949. But then, from that point onwards, the recognition was there. And even earlier in point of time, when we were under the British, we find that certain regulations were there which were adopted or which were provided for this part of the country, so that when we speak of the aspect of governance, through the recognized institutions, even the aspect of traditional institutions, do not stand alienated, or these traditional institutions do not stand alienated. The accountability with respect of good governance was sought to be ensured. Transparency was sought to be ensured. Responsiveness, equitable, effective, efficient. So that the most important aspect was that of participation. Participatory governance in those traditional areas, or in areas where traditional institutions had a very important role to play. And here, when you look at this has been a continuous process. And even today, we find that the contribution or the role or the need to protect traditional communities, Aboriginal people, have found recognition in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was adopted after 25 long years of deliberations on 13th September 2007. And that particular declaration speaks of preservation of the rights of the indigenous peoples, and so far India is concerned, of the 500 odd million people across the globe, Asia has the largest indigenous peoples, and within Asia, India has the largest people, and the Northeast has a significant population of indigenous peoples. Now, what this declaration stated was with regard to lands, no alienation of lands, the culture and customs, and the modalities of administration of justice. And when we look at these aspects, what we find is that each and every state in this region, as today, have recognized the role of the traditional institutions, the role of administration of justice, because here, this is an area where, because of the long established system of mediation, we find that there is no acrimony. It's a win-win situation. Of course, when you speak of mediation, they say it is a win-win situation. But then, mediation may be state-sponsored, court-recognized. Mediation may be in the form of disputes between states. We had the Subhram Commission earlier. Different commissions were there. So far, Assam, Nagaland boundary dispute haven't been concerned. Assam Arunachal dispute, and dispute of land dispute, that is primarily. But then some of these have come up with certain recommendations. But then these were mediatory activities, mediation only, state-sponsored mediation, which have not yielded in the desired results. Say, for example, mediation was taken a course to with regard to Nagaland and Assam, but then 92 recommendations which were there were not accepted to the state of Assam. There have been mediatory efforts, whether you call it peace accords, peace process, we have had these, but these are state-sponsored. Say, for example, when FISO entered into dialogue with the government initially during the days of VP Charias as the Chief Minister, and subsequently with the Prime Minister in abroad. Now these processes are mediatory processes, but then these are state sponsored. Some of the mediation processes are being provided because of the judiciary. And now I'll just come back to the reason. But then the government introduced a bill in Parliament in 2021, which says, which desires that we should have a mediation process prior to moving the apex court in civil and commercial matters. Why? Because they feel that it will not only burden the backlog, of course, caseload of the judiciary, but it will also provide an avenue for engagement so that the possibility of coordination between cooperation or understanding may evolve. Now, in all these, a third party is involved. That is where the difference between a lok adalat, a mediatory process, conciliation process lies. In case of the lok adalat, it is a judicial officer who tries to bring about a settlement in a matter which is pending before the court to explore the possibility of out-of-court settlement. In conciliation also, the third party plays an important role. But when it comes to mediation, the third party is a neutral individual of 2 or 3, who tries to assist both the parties and does not have any role in influencing the parties. So either you have a settlement or you tend to leave it at that, so that the mediation process may end in a failure, which may be taken up in the regular court of law. Now, so far, the Northeast is concerned. So far, Assam is concerned. Here, if you look at the role of an institution which is not very much prominent or which has not had the recognition formally, not because of any inherent limitations, but because of the fact that they have been working in a low-profile manner, but they have done substantial work over the years. I would refer to the Law Research Institute of the Gauhati High Court. When we had a single High Court with outlying benches in the other states of the Northeast, this Law Research Institute had the occasion to go into areas under the jurisdiction of the Gauhati High Court since the days of its establishment, under the initial directorship of Dr. N.K. Sinha, who is no longer there. But then they have tried to bring in, particularly in the initial stages, Sinha was a law person, N.K. Singh, sorry, not Sinha, N.K. Singh, but thereafter, J.N. Das was a very prominent civil servant, revenue secretary, then others from anthropology. They looked at it from a different prism, but then they have carried out studies in almost all the districts, and they have come up with almost 40 publications on different aspects of the customary laws of their Assam, or present-day Northeast. And while discussing these aspects, these documented forms have also gone into the aspect of mediation. How mediation is helping us in what respect mediation is carried on and how it has been conducted and how since long, how it has been applied. Whether you look at the legislations since the beginning of 1822 and thereafter, all the laws, including the British law of evidence. I say British because it was passed by the British Parliament. The IPC, the Indian Penal Code, in some aspect, it says that the spirit of the law will prevail. Of course, at that point of time, it was Naga Hills in particular. But then, the spirit of the law will prevail, not in black and white, not the strict letter of the law. Evidence Act, similarly under Section 13, it provides for addressing or recognizing issues which are under mediation. Likewise, we have a number of other statutes which have been passed, including the Bengal Regulation Act, legislation from UP have been adopted by Tripura. Tripura being a kingdom at that point of time had the difference set. So far, the Assam Regulation Act, the Land Revenue Regulation Act, other laws, all these do recognize the role of the mediators. And this aspect has also been adequately highlighted in a paper by Sanjeev Goswami. I believe he is associated with the organization. Legal Pluralism and Administration of Justice in Northeast India. This was presented at a seminar in Australia on Monash University in 2010. But he has also discussed deliberately as to the significance of this method of alternate dispute resolution that prevails in Northeast India, wherein the non-adversarial system of justice has been very successfully implemented, besides those of the quasi-judicial systems. Of course, now we have the Legal Services Authorities Act of 1987. Some of the things have been taken up, but then when we look at the traditional institutions, the dispute resolution mechanism, the perception of the adversarial system and that of the non-adversarial system, it is recognized that the non-adversarial system is very much suited and it has a lot of advantages apart from early settlement, low cost involved, and at times it may not be acceptable in certain cases. If it is not acceptable, then that will gradually, with the passage of time, certain changes have been taking place because some of the aspects were not accepted. And this is not that it is only we have the mediation system amongst in our communities, but this is found to be so in Africa. It is found to be there in the native states in America and other jurisdictions as well. So, in this particular paper that I have mentioned to of Mr. Goswami, he refers to Anurag Agrawal's observations. I'm just reading out there. He stated that in his treatment of the subject related to the People's Court in India, shows how in order to get out of the maze of litigation, courts and lawyer chambers in most of the countries encouraged alternate methods of dispute resolution. He presents India's role in having a long tradition of such methods which are being practiced in society at the grassroots level. These, he says, are called panchayat or village councils. This is, of course, a later variation of the traditional mediation. And in the legal terminology, are known as arbitration. These are widely used in India for resolution of disputes, both commercial and non-commercial, since time immemorial. He presents India's contribution to the field as one having a trust on preventive law. So here I mentioned about the sixth schedule, and the sixth schedule with regard to Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, and Mizoram plays an important part in recognizing the role of the mediators in traditional adjudication of disputes. Interestingly, Arunachal does not figure officially, although in Assam, the sixth schedule was amended after the decision to incorporate some areas from the then border and territorial organization in those areas. So here, this may have been because at that point of time when the constitution was adopted, it was NAFA and not Arunachal Pradesh, and it had some administrative links with the state of Assam. But nonetheless, despite having a major tribal population, having traditional systems, this was not recognized specifically. But nonetheless, these have mediation has played an important role in the traditional societies in Arunachal Pradesh. I just mentioned two illustrations later on. So far, Tripura and Mizoram are concerned. Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, and Mizoram, these four states, provides for setting up of district and regional councils as separate administrative units. Of course, at a subsequent point of time, it was for long. In case of particularly Karbi Anglong, the district judge did not belong to the state judicial service, and the Supreme Court had to reflect on that and suggested that those states which had certain executive or different mode of appointment of district judges who do not directly follow, come under the ambit of the Constitution, should be brought within the ambit of the Constitution with regard to their process of appointment, recruitment, so as to become some form of uniformity in all. Yet, here we have the regional councils, the district councils, because the district councils have to provide for, or rather they provide for the budget of various administrative units in the district. Although they form part of the respective states, the district councils are a form of legislative body which has certain administrative powers, which has certain executive powers, and they have to be function in accordance with the source of revenue that they receive from the council. Now, here we find that when we look at the operation of these district councils, they have to operate in certain aspects under the provisions of the Code of Civil Procedure 1908, as well as that of the Code of Criminal Procedure, which was earlier promulgated in the year 1891. But then here, when we speak of mediation, the basic trust of mediation we find in the democratic village councils. The democratic village councils dispense justice. Of course, there is a variation from district to district, among the states, but then this democratic system of dispensation of justice primarily signified the old tribal communities which had an advanced system of administrative process. British annexed India, but then they, since 1826, they were alive to this situation and they did not try to intervene or take away the powers of mediation, because here it was felt that the way of governance in these areas that has been provided have been very much beneficial, because there is no acrimony once a matter is resolved, and therefore preservation of peace, the focal theme of this year, harmony, peace, that was very much in evidence. It was a primary concern as to how to, because in those traditional societies at that point in time, peace was the main concern. And therefore, it was found that this traditional system of mediation helped in preserving peace in the society, because of the inherent strength of justice in these areas. It is expeditious and it does not lead to acrimony. It is cost effective and the people accept it. In some cases, the entire village, elders of the village sit together and resolve a dispute. In some cases, the village headman is involved. In some cases, in certain jurisdictions, it is said that the person should be from the family. Of course, there is a criticism that if one is from a family, then there may be biasness. But then they believe that if a person from a family is involved in the mediation process, in that case, he gains the confidence of both the parties, and therefore biasness is ruled out. In other cases, it's a neutral person, and in certain cases, that I say, the elders of the village sit together and they take a decision, and this decision, whatever is taken, is accepted. And in certain cases, it is an individual or two. There are maybe one or two individuals help or assist in the process, but then they recognized the right of the parties, to the freedom of the parties rather, either to come to a decision or to avoid such decisions. So they are not bound. There no imposition is there in the process of mediation. And this continued for long. And today, therefore, what we have is that when we speak of administrative justice, in certain cases, the oaths and ordeals that they have to face determine whether someone has committed an offense or a crime and proceed accordingly. Oath means when they swear by a river or some god or some belief systems, under some belief systems, they believe that if they lie, in that case, they will be punished for that, and therefore their system was such that they took it for granted that if someone takes an oath, then he or she will be speaking the truth. Ordeals are there. Certain things are not very much acceptable in modern society, as putting, say, red hot iron on the palm or something of that sort. So they believe that if it injures the person or if it burns the skin, then it is a guilt, otherwise not. But then it is common knowledge that everyone who is put red hot iron stick or weapon will suffer damage, injury. So here, how much time do you have?
Please carry on.
Yeah. So when you look at the situations, these village courts happen to be one system. In certain cases, the village community. In certain cases, the Gaugura appoints. In certain cases, the village himself, headman himself, is the person who mediates. But then the basic aim is to ensure that the dispute has to be resolved, has to be settled within the village or within the community itself. There have been certain rules which have been recognized. These rules, particularly although Mizoram came into being much later, but then so far the Lusai Hills, earlier it was Aijon, Lunglei, and the Lusai Hills were there. So 1937, 1953, rules, there were certain rules which were there in modified from the earlier rules of 1906 and subsequently under Northeast Reorganization Act of 1972. These were accommodated with slight modifications, but the important aspect is that the government did not come in the way or exercise of the process of mediation by the communities. Similarly, despite the parallel system of functioning, it has been well recognized that under the district council code, which is considered to be an appellate and revisionary authority, happens to be the subordinate district court, which is considered to be, in certain cases, original, in certain cases, appellate authority. But the basic original code was considered to be the village code. So if there was mediatory process, it resulted in a successful outcome. In that case, the matter never reached the subordinate district court or the district court, not to speak of the High Court and the Supreme Court. So, on the other hand, Assistant Deputy Commissioner's Court and the Deputy Commissioner's Court deal with certain other matters. Similarly, although the 6th schedule does not apply to the state of Arunachal Pradesh, but the village councils are very much active in Arunachal. The Apatanis, Monpas, Noctas, Khampis, who are Buddhists primarily, Nisis, Idumismis, all the major tribes have village courts, village councils to settle disputes. So such was the system that for long, Arunachal Pradesh did not have a court or a jail, particularly jails. So they had, if someone went to the court or someone was held guilty, someone was imprisoned, then they had to be brought down to Assam. And same was the case with, although I have not discussed with Sikkim, a person, if he was imprisoned or some sentence was passed, in that case he had to be taken to Darjeeling, because there was no system of jail at that point of time. And within dispensation of justice varied from community to community, and the village chief had a primary role in each village. In case of the Mishmis, it was not the village chief, but as I mentioned earlier, the entire village used to sit and resolve the issue. That is, they went in for an amicable settlement without trial. And the Noctas, they had a system where the decision rendered by the village chief was considered to be binding on them. So similarly, if you look to Manipur, which became a part of the Indian Union on 21st September 1949, it had the Manipur State Hills People's Regulation of 1847, which address the issues of the village courts. But then, unlike the other states, Manipur did follow the CPC and the CRPC, that are Civil Procedure Code and the Criminal Procedure Code, both in letter and spirit. So, but then because of the composition of the people, the population in Manipur, Kugis and Naga type, then again, the people in the hills and the plains. Hills, plains, of course, there is some differences. There were some commissions which tried to bring about an amicable settlement. But then, so far, the two major communities haven't been concerned. We from the Northeast are fairly conversant that in Nagaland there is a Manipur there is a predominantly Naga community. And when we speak of it, instantly the issue of NSCN comes to the forefront because Muiba happens to be a Tangkur Naga. So similarly, I remember once a commission Vishnupuriam and Mighty Manipuris, there was some problem and it was sought to be resolved by mediation. And two persons from our department happened to be involved. And there was some amount of acrimony, no doubt. But then ultimately, there was some consensus as well, because their main objective was to see if there could be a process through which we could resolve our disputes. So far, Assam is concerned, primarily in Karbi Anglong, earlier North Kachar, that is Dimasa, are the areas where pluralistic legal administration exists, and we have it till today. And these were mainly governed by certain rules which were adopted in the year 1884. As in case of Tripura, I had mentioned that it being a kingdom, it had their own set of procedures before 1873. And they had the village courts and the king's courts. And primarily there were two communities, one belonging being the Chakmas and the other the non-Chakmas. And the Chakmas, because of their shifting from Chittagong into tracks, they relied more on the king's court and then the villages. As in their case, similarly, in the case of the then Khasi and Jaitia hills under the state of Assam, they also had conferred certain powers to the village courts of the headmen. So the headmen had a lot of powers, and if you look at it, whatever powers are being exercised, or the influence is being exercised by the village headmen in the state of Assam. In contrast, the village headmen in Meghalaya are much more effective because they have the responsibility of adjudicating such problems, or rather mediating such issues arising in those districts.
So now the floor is open for interaction with the professor.
Thank you, Professor Subhram Rajkhowa, for such an insightful lecture, specifically referring to the process of mediation in different tribal communities of Northeast India. And as you have referred, the process of mediation, starting from state-sponsored mediation process and the very strong village-level mediation process. And what we look at in Northeast, specifically the 6 scheduled areas of Assam, in Karbi Anglong, Dima Hasao, and recently in BTAD, and the erstwhile tracts of Arunachal Pradesh, Balipara, Tirap, or whatever, and the hills areas of Tripura, which are also in 6th schedule, and the Lai, Mara, and Chakma Council, that the southern part of Lunglei in Mizoram. All these things are very interesting, and you have highlighted all these dimensions, and you have said that the most important and strong mediation process is there in the villages. So, and also you have said that there are differences. For example, if we look at the mediation process of earlier tracts or NEFA or present Arunachal Pradesh and certain other parts or like Khasi or in Karbi Anglong itself, we find differences. So, what type of, can you focus the basics of the mediation, that what happened in the villages and what to learn from these mediations by the modern mediation process? That is my basic question. That actually we find so many differences and so many strong points also. So what strong points could be learned by the present mediation process, or what should we learn in present? Thank you.
So basically, when you speak of the processes, what are the advantages or the positive outcome of this process, of such processes? The most important aspect is that when it is a court which takes up the adversarial system, a party wins, then the other party loses. And then that acrimony remains. Secondly, as we have seen or witnessed, that a settlement takes a long time, a very long time. So years and years, particularly a civil dispute, will be decided in one court, it will go in appeal to the next one, this and that way. If it goes to Supreme Court, the person knows if his case is weak, that in his lifetime also, he can get it drag on, and then there will be no settlement. In the process, what happens? Both the parties lose everything. But then here, this process leads to a settlement, because the mediator gives some solutions, and they say that, will you go in for this? This would be the consequence. Because nowadays, when we speak of court monitored mediators or others, they have the skills. Now the Gauhati High Court, like other high courts, have a mediation cell where all the judicial officers are being trained as to how to mediate, so that cases which come up before them, they will explore the possibility of mediation, and through the skills, so that they can develop the confidence in the people, or they can relate to them what may be the consequences of losing and winning a case, or what would be the outcome of a settlement between the parties. So here, one is, it has successfully evolved over the centuries, and it has led to settlement of dispute. In certain cases, people may not see eye to eye in the initial stages, but then they come together, they understand their positions, they reconcile, and the families come together. In some cases, what happens? Say if there is a matter which goes to the civil court or a criminal court, it will, in a criminal court, it will lead to a sentence. One will be convicted and will be sentenced. In a civil court, one will be given some punishment, someone will win the case, decree in his favor. Then again, if the decree is not implemented, then again we have to go in a brief execution of decree. So this is a very cumbersome and laborious process. But then when you come to criminal cases in particular, you will be imprisoned. The government may say you pay a fine, but then there is no concept of compensation. Suppose the person is awarded death penalty, I'll get the satisfaction that for this serious offense of crime, this person has been awarded death penalty. He has been convicted by the court. Then do I get anything in return except for the moral satisfaction? Nothing. My family may be doing, but then when it comes to a mediation, then these mediators will decide, and then ultimately they will also award some compensation. Or they'll say, in case of Arunachal, we are very much aware that Mitu is a highly respected animal. And then you get it, they provide you, they compensate you by such means or by some form of monetary compensation. So the loss that you have incurred cannot be compensated. But even then, if you are really in a very bad state of affairs, in that case, some amount of monetary compensation or in some form of reparation. Say, they decide that you have to part with this portion or parcel of land to the other party. In that case, the party gets some relief in the real sense of the term. There are positive and negative aspects of both. But then, when it comes to mediation, it is the
win-win situation.
yeah, it's a win-win situation for you. And interestingly, even village courts or some traditional mediators sometimes decide upon not only heinous crimes as rape, but even murder. And the people accept it. There have been instances where people have accepted the decision of the village court or the mediator to accept the process of murder. Then something will be done, whatever they do. They will not go further. Further activity will not be there. But there have been situations, say for example, in Arunachal Pradesh, a person killed somebody and he was imprisoned. He was in police custody, not in prison. He was in police custody, and there was a village meeting, and they said that we need him back. He was released by the DC. He came back on an auto, and the other group intervened and killed him on the spot. The villagers, neither their family nor the villagers did anything. They decided that he was killed, so retaliation was there. It ends there. So no further imprisonment, nothing. This may not be acceptable to the present day society. But then they had a system, or they used to go for this. Then how do you compensate in that case? How do you deal with marriage? How do you deal with divorce? They have their own systems. So that once they come to an agreement amongst them, in that case, there won't be any further acrimony between them, or they will not go beyond. But then they realize that if they go to the court, in that case, it may take a long time for them to get justice, and at times they may feel that whatever they felt, they may not get because the system is